Our nation's founders gathered in taverns to enjoy lively political conversation over a local brew. And so do we. It's a special Pints and Politics edition of River to River, presented by the Gazette and Iowa Public Radio. Today, coming to you from CSPS in Cedar Rapids, I'm Ben Kiefer.
And I am Erin Jordan.
So nice to see you after such an absence, and we have an esteemed panel.
That's right. I have the pleasure of introducing them. So on my far left here, we've got Adam Sullivan, Gazette columnist. James Lynch, Gazette political reporter. Liz Lenz, Gazette columnist. And Todd Dorman, Gazette Insights and Opinion Editor.
So much to talk about. A little later, we have some questions from the audience already. Of course, this program, this event lives from questions from the audience, so please continue to write those, hand those forward. We'll ask as many as we can during the 90 minutes that we have together. Let's start off with the impeachment hearing, since that seems to permeate almost everything. Okay. Some of you are happy about that, some are not. Just in the last few days, it goes so fast. Speaker Nancy Pelosi asking the House Judiciary Committee to proceed with drafting impeachment articles against the president. The president cutting short a trip to London where other world leaders appeared to mock him. It looks like the likelihood of impeachment perhaps before Christmas time. We've had the past several weeks of hearings, the House Intelligence Committee, followed by this week a day of hearings before the House Judiciary Committee. I guess the first question that I'd like to ask about this is what impact those hearings have had, do you feel? And there are different levels on public attitudes. Did it shift them? And of course, key to this is going to be if any shift took place in our congressional delegation. Who wants to take a first stab at that? Adam?
I think the polls say that support for and against impeachment has been pretty steady throughout the process. It's moved up and down a few times. I think Iowa's congressional delegation, certainly Steve King will vote against impeachment. I think the three Democrats have pretty much kept their powder dry. I mean, they've said that they support the process. They want to see where it goes. Dave Loebsack is a unique case. He's retiring, so I would expect him to vote his conscience, I guess. But Abby Finkenauer and Cindy Axne have a tough job. They are a couple of the toughest districts. Both districts have a plurality of no-party voters. Both districts have a fair number of Republican voters. Those are both districts that have been held by Republicans within the last few years. And so the way they voted in impeachment has real impacts on their general election prospects. So it'll be really interesting to see. But for now, I don't think that they haven't gotten out in front of themselves to make statements on every development in the impeachment like some other House members have.
Well, they do support impeachment, but they've kind of couched it in this way of saying, like, we support impeachment, but we're also, we're doing a lot of hard work for the American people, and they're doing an incredible job. But I think it's really interesting that our senators seem to keep hiding behind this thing. It's like, the people in Iowa don't care about impeachment. It's like, if you polled, there's a lot of things that general Americans don't care about, but we do anyway because it's right. So, it's just, I think that's just like a weird kind of logic, and I get that it's politics, but it also seems like, that it's a weird thing to hide behind by saying, like, well, if people don't care about it, then I can just pretend it's not happening.
Well, and the other thing is that they can hide behind the fact that the senators can hide behind the fact that it hasn't come over to the Senate.
Right. Yeah, that's Grassley's whole thing.
It's incoming.
Oh, it's coming.
And I would say this is only tangential to impeachment, but both Grassley and Ernst have said, no, you should not reveal the identity of the whistleblower. We have legal protections for that. So that's at least better than some other Senate Republicans.
Well, I thought it was interesting. I believe it was NPR had done the story about looking at TV ratings during the impeachment hearings, and they found people were watching this. So it does kind of go to what you're saying, Liz, about interest.
Yeah, people are interested. It's so interesting when you read, like, you know, like the New York Times or the Washington Post will do a story. It's like, well, we asked people at a rally and nobody, or we talked to people at a rally and nobody brought it up. It's like, okay, like if you're at a Warren rally, maybe you want to talk about Medicare for all, but it seems like it's just this like really dumb logic to say like that Iowans don't care because we are a deeply invested state. We are smart, we know our political stuff, and we care about impeachment.
Well,
Liz, you know, Todd, go ahead. And
I
then
was just
another-
going to say, and what are you going to ask Senator Warren? I mean, how much are you going to impeach him? I mean,
Yeah.
are you going to try to
On a
impeach him
scale
lot
of 1
or
to
just a
impeach
little
him to
bit?
the sun, where are you gonna go?
This is a good opportunity to put this to the test. We're in Lynn County. We're in Cedar Rapids, and we have about 200 people politically engaged. We have to say right in our audience, let me ask you to clap if you watch at least an hour of any of the hearings. Okay, now I'm just going to progress up in the number of hours, and we'll see how, your level of political junkiness here. Junkiness? No, that wasn't good. Your political junkies. That didn't work. Okay, so clap if you watch 2 or more hours. 3 or more hours. 4 or more hours. 5 or more hours. 6 or more hours. 7. Okay.
Well,
I've run out of fingers on my hands, so we do have.
And the other thing is like we can care about a lot of things at the same time. You know what I mean? Like we can care about impeachment. We can care about this political, you know, presidential nominating process. We can care about the USMCA. We're humans. We hold multitudes. We can do it all. It's 2019.
One last audience participation for this part of the show, and be honest about this, please. Clap if watching the hearings changed your mind in any way about the president's actions. That sounded more like laughing than clapping.
Well, you know, Liz, you had mentioned caring about multiple things at one time. How do you think the impeachment inquiry will shape the 2020 election?
Well, first of all, it's a long, hard road to the election, and there's going to be a lot of malarkey that's going to happen until we get there. But I think it's pretty safe to say this is a defining political moment of our time right now, and it's really foolish to think that it's just going to go away if we yell Hunter Biden enough. It's not. This is a huge thing, and it's easy now, I think, in the middle of it to think, you know, to hear the conspiracy theories or all the talking points and kind of get subsumed by it. But I think if you think about this historically, impeachment has always been a big frickin' deal in America, and I think this is too. And I think it's going to shape our. I think it's going to shape the election in ways we can't even dream about. But maybe James can.
I don't dream about it, no.
Todd Dorman, do you dream about it?
I'd rather not say. Maybe a couple nightmares. Maybe you know, it's. How is it going to change the 2020 election? I think Liz is right. It's a long time until then, but I think in a way it's going to galvanize the bases of both parties. I think Democrats really feel strongly about this. Republicans feel strongly the other way about the various defenses that they've cooked up to argue that the president selling, you know, influence to a foreign government for political gain is not so bad, really.
That's the defense.
Yeah. Well, I think, I mean,
Get over it was the line.
Yeah.
well, right. It has to affect it in some way, but the way things are going, what we've seen the last several years, I mean, what other crises and you know, huge stories and big moments are going to happen between now and November? It's impossible to say. It's going to be a roller coaster ride on top of a train on a rocket.
Inside of a nightmare.
Wrapped in a. Well,
Wrapped in a mystery, folded into a panini of a riddle. That's what Churchill said.
Enigma.
I think it's also going to depend on what the Senate does. I mean, I think it's highly unlikely the Senate is going to remove the president. So then the election could very well become a referendum on Donald Trump. If they remove him, who knows what the election is going to be about. But I think it's going to be a referendum on Donald Trump, and typically that's what re-election campaigns are anyway. So it's not going to change it in that regard. But it also depends on how long the Senate is tied up talking about impeachment and having this trial. So, if half the candidates are tied up in the Senate rather than campaigning, it could have a big impact on who the nominee is. And if they decide to talk about impeachment for the next 6 months.
Well, even like with Clinton, I mean, he was not, they didn't vote to impeach, but that had defined the next several elections when Republicans just kept winning and winning and winning. Then we got into a war, and that sucked. So
I think that the bigger impact, I mean, it's hard to say how the presidential election shakes out, but the much bigger impact is on House and Senate races, because you have a lot of senators and representatives in either party who do not want to take a vote for or against impeachment because it's perilous either way, and just a handful of House seats or even just 1 or 2 Senate seats, if that is able to swing that's a huge deal for whoever the next president is. That could dictate control of one or the other chambers or give them a bigger majority. So I think and it's also interesting, so the Des Moines Register polled about this early in November. They found that most Iowans thought that the impeachment would help their side, whichever side they're on. Most Iowans thought that it would help them, and I think that is reflected in national polls as well.
So speaking of the 2020 election, we've had quite a bit of ground shifting since our last Pints in Politics, which was early October. So we've had Kamala Harris, Steve Bullock, Joe Sestak, and Mark Sanford all ending their presidential campaigns in the past few weeks. Harris is the most high profile. I was in Des Moines yesterday and I saw staffers clearing signs out of her office, so it was interesting there. So Harris said that her campaign didn't have the money at this point. And there are still candidates of color in the race, including Cory Booker and Julian Castro. But what does Harris's departure do to the Democrats' goal of winning votes from people of color?
Well, Warren's always polled better among people of color than any other candidate at this point. But, wow.
Thinking of Joe Biden.
Was I thinking of Joe Biden?
Yeah. It happens to
he's
me all the
still
time.
in. Oh, I always forget about Joe Biden.
You're a sweetheart.
Say it into the mic so they can hear you.
That's malarkey.
That's malarkey. You're correct. Biden and then Warren, and I apologize. I was thinking of Warren polling better among people who are LGBTQ. So thank you for that correction, Adam. I really appreciate it. Any other time you want to jump in and tell me I'm wrong?
Time fact checking.
Good timing. Yeah, so I mean, and I think that's one of the reasons her support never really took off, because there wasn't that base. She was in the southern states before she decided she was going to move to Iowa, campaigning really hard. And then when that wasn't panning out, then she came here, and then that didn't pan out. And so, I wish that money wasn't such an influence, because while she was such a strong candidate, and an interesting candidate and a compelling candidate, she had to leave, but yet John Delaney remains,
So I mean, her official tweet about this is that she's not a billionaire and can't afford this. But I mean, that's really taking the weight off her shoulders. I wonder if she had national polling well into the double digits in the summer, also here in Iowa. So we have to explain her plunge in other terms than just money, don't we, James?
Yeah, I think part of it was we really didn't know what she stood for. She was for Medicare for All until she wasn't, and she confused people, so they didn't really know who Kamala Harris was and what she stood for. I mean, I think that's on her. The money, it's hard to believe that anybody running for president doesn't have enough money. I mean, given all the money in politics, it's hard to believe. And there are some people who would say that's a sort of a referendum on that candidate if they can't raise the money. With John Delaney still in the race, he's pretty much self-funded, so he can stay as long as his wife will let him have the checkbook, I guess. But Kamala Harris's problems aren't all about money.
True.
I think it's a
But-
mistake to assume that people of color in the voter base are going to automatically be drawn to candidates of color. And
Yeah.
huge caveat here: this is an all-white panel talking to an overwhelmingly white audience, and so I mean,
Always a
go
caveat.
if you want to know what black people think, go talk to black people, right? But I'd also say so. Tulsi Gabbard and Andrew Yang are also not white. They're actually polling better in a lot of cases. We have Yang Gang here. They're polling better in a lot of cases than Cory Booker and Julian Castro, who on paper have more of the boxes checked for who's a legitimate presidential candidate. And so I think the mainstream media's very superficial calculus of where people of color should end up is really wrong, and it isn't that helpful to have that conversation the way that we're having it.
I think there's also an interesting thing where, there was that New York Times story where, like 40 people from Harris's campaign went on the record to say this campaign isn't being run really well, which is a huge thing because normally political people are like, I'll talk to you on background, but I won't give you my name. They don't like to put their names out there, which is fine, I guess, not really, but say it and mean it. But I think that shows a really significant frustration with the way the campaign was being run. And of course, if you're the person, the buck stops here. And yet, I will say there are other campaigns that are not run well. There are other candidates who flip-flop on issues in that same way, Pete Buttigieg, and who still remain. So I don't think we can completely factor out race, in this election and the expectations that we have of women of color and people of color. And I think that should always be a part of this very complicated discussion that we have. And to ignore it, we do so at our peril.
So South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg now is viewed as the front runner. We've had a lot of new polling indicating that. And we've seen more attacks on him as the front runner from candidates and more public scrutiny of his past comments and experience level and that kind of thing. Todd, how do you think he's weathering the blows?
Well, it's a little early to say in that his polling status as the front runner is fairly new, and the heavy criticism that he's starting to take is just beginning. He's an inexperienced politician. He's a smart guy. He has done well in Iowa because he's campaigned a lot and people like to hear what he has to say. He's a very polished speaker. He does a great job on the stump. But it's going to be interesting to see how he handles this, being that the biggest office he sought as mayor of South Bend, Indiana, got 8,500 votes. And I don't think he faced the kind of onslaught that he's going to face. So this is the big test. He's got good organization, as we talked about with Harris not having that. He's got fundraising. He's got all of the tools to sort of to weather the storm. The question is whether he can, and whether, as we talked about, candidates of color, voters of color, this has been sort of the often repeated criticism of Pete Buttigieg is he doesn't appeal to voters of color, and that's going to be a problem for him going forward in the primary. They've pushed back a lot on that, and there was a very odd incident last night with folks who tried to break up a group of people that were people in South Bend that were supporting his campaign. So it's going to be a lot different the next few months for Pete Buttigieg than sort of the below the radar kind of grassroots effort he's done in the last 6 to 8 months, funded by a lot of money from outside of Iowa and outside of South Bend.
It's also just as a caveat, it's kind of a lesson in how obsessed the media is with early states, because everyone's calling him the front runner. To my knowledge, he's not polling in the top 3 in any state except Iowa and New Hampshire. And he has really healthy leads in Iowa and New Hampshire. Whether that's sustainable, I kind of doubt. But it's just, you're the front runner in Iowa for a week, and then you're like the national headlines for everything. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have a 50-state strategy like some other candidates might have.
Well, and you don't win the caucuses in November and December. I mean, that's a lot of candidates have proven that over the years.
Well, there's a long road to February, and it's full of potholes. And as a mayor, he's still learning how to fill them because he's hardly inexperienced. And it's and we're just journalists are just learning about his time with McKinsey, right? The consulting firm. Yeah. There was that big story that was out today that was like, what did he actually do with them? Like, what is his experience? The whole issue about him like not actually understanding that South Bend schools were segregated. The schools that he oversaw, like in his town as a mayor, like, and so there's just like huge blind sides to his policy and his campaign. A couple months ago, he had that tweet where he was like, "Oh, everybody keeps asking, I'm totally Medicare for all," and now he's like, "Medicare for all, who wants it? But not immigrants," you know. And so it does seem to be this kind of slippery, shifting thing that, and the hits are now just starting. I don't think he's going to weather it well.
Yeah, and they're coming from all directions. I mean, you see a lot of posts on Twitter right now about him ringing the bell for the Salvation Army, which doesn't sit well with the LGBTQ
I heard he's homophobic. That's what they're saying now.
That's a difficult accusation to land, but someone's going to try.
People are saying, Todd. People are saying.
Yeah.
Some people think this.
Some people.
We're hearing it from focus groups.
Well, but that out poll did show that the LGBTQ folks that do overwhelmingly support Warren. So it's a question of, and you know, like, so what? So like, if he wins the caucuses.
February 3rd.
And I'll have some words for everybody if that happens. But like, if he wins the caucuses, you can foresee a scenario where he doesn't do well. Like Adam was saying, there's no 50 state like process, no game there. And then what? And then we've once again made ourselves kind of irrelevant. So I think my appeal to Iowans is, come on, guys.
Do not ask Liz if she wants a Mayor Pete yard sign. It's non-starter.
I'm agnostic. Why be wrong now when I can be wrong later?
Let me remind our radio audience that you're listening to a special edition of River to River, Pints and Politics, coming to you in a recorded evening at CSPS in Cedar Rapids with James Lynch, Todd Dorman, Adam Sullivan, and Liz Lentz, my co-host Aaron Jordan of the Gazette. And I wanted to reach out and, on this point, take advantage of our audience here to do some informal, non-scientific polling about attendance to the caucus. I have 4 questions. Get ready to clap or not clap. Clap if you are for sure attending the caucuses. Okay? That we expected. Clap if you have firmly decided to back one candidate here now in early December. I'm going to say that's a quarter to a third. I don't know. Clap if you are undecided or still open to being swayed. And the final question, clap if you will support the Democratic nominee, no matter who it is.
So while we're
Sense of
talking,
split.
Comment on that informal polling.
Seems scientific.
Yeah.
Seems
Some people say.
If the election were held today in this place with
In
only
this
these people,
This precinct.
It would be about as diverse as the rest of the state.
so while we're on the topic of the 2020 caucuses, this is a question from an audience member. Is Joe Biden's Iowa tour, this is their words, his last-ditch effort, going to be successful to launch him to be the nominee?
There's no last-ditch efforts in
No.
the beginning of December.
There's, yeah. I mean, this is a
James,
good time probably to do this sort of a tour. You know, people are starting to shorten their short list and come and make the case for why they should cross off everybody but Joe Biden. Whether it'll be successful, I don't know. He's, you know, people are responding, talking to people who have seen him. You know, people are enthusiastic, but then we're seeing that Elizabeth Warren rallies, at, you know, anybody else who's running, you know, the 15 other people who are running. So, again, it's really too early to tell. I would agree that there is no last-ditch effort in December, and I think people who are writing off Joe Biden need to look beyond the borders of Iowa.
he today got into a fight with a man at a New Hampton rally.
Because he's passionate.
Yeah, would you say that about a woman? Like, I don't think that's, there's a, would you if she started shouting at an 80-year-old person, or would you say she was unhinged?
Well, when you're 77, what's an 80-year-old?
Well, I mean, I think the example of that was they were both nuts, and they were both yelling at each other, which that was like Thanksgiving dinner for most of us. 70-plus-year-olds yelling at each other about what's on the TV, and it was just it's just yet another example of how he's not a stable candidate. Like when he gets off cuff, when's he gonna apologize to Anita Hill? He's running a 2008 campaign in 2019. And I get y'all love your Uncle Joe, but he is not the good candidate to face a Donald Trump. He's not who we need to lead us with progressive policies.
I think you're about to be challenged to a push-up competition.
Yeah.
I'm so ready right now. I'm so ready for a push-up competition. Maybe not an IQ one.
We have
Just get
so
your
many
facts
questions.
straight, Jack.
We have so many good questions from the audience, and we promise to get to as many as time allows. Here's a question that pertains to our congressional races. Of course, all 4 House seats up for re-election and 1 Senate seat in 2020. This questioner wants to know, what is the current state of the race for the 2nd district, the open seat, Loebsack's seat? He announced his retirement here in Cedar Rapids. We are on the southern edge of the 1st district, so we're very close to the 2nd district.
Well, as a 2nd district citizen, I can tell you, Rita Hart has almost cleared the field as a Democrat. You'll remember she ran with Fred Hubbell for governor as lieutenant governor candidate. There is one other candidate who lives in Iowa City who I've met with, Newman Abuisa. He's not well funded, but he has interesting ideas. Rita Hart has not said yet whether she would appear at forums and debates with him. I hope she will. She's obviously going to be nominated, but I hope she goes through that process. The Republican side for the nomination is much more interesting. You have Marionette Miller Meeks, who's run 3 times for this office before, and Bobby Schilling, who's a former Illinois congressman. Really fascinating. Just in the last few weeks, it's kind of developed. Bobby Schilling is trying to present himself as the social conservative candidate. When he ran for U.S. House in 2010 in Illinois, he was against gay marriage. He hasn't said which side he's on that now. He's against he makes a big thing out of trans women being in. Trans women being in men's sports. He makes a big deal about that. I don't know why a congressman needs to care about that. He's making a big thing out of being pro-life, which is, I get that matters to Republicans. It does not matter to 2nd District general election voters. And Marionette Miller Meeks is very conservative. I think she would consider herself a social conservative. But it's just interesting to see the way that they prioritize those values, whether you're running a primary campaign or whether you're running a general election campaign. Miller Meeks has been endorsed by some of the the establishment people in the Republican Party, but Schilling has his own people too. So it's an interesting race. I encourage folks to watch it.
But recently, Schilling and Miller Meeks were at an event that was an anti-immigration event in Bettendorf, where they appeared alongside Nick Fuentes, who, if you don't know him, he was, appeared at the Charlottesville rally and has become a far-right figure. And this whole event was very, it's pretty alt-right, and so it's it feels like such a Steve King move, and and it's really disgusting to see people going into a space where actual neo-Nazis are, and so it is something we need to talk about in this state because it's a real problem.
So I wanted to hit on the 1st district race too, which, as Ben mentioned, includes Cedar Rapids. So here we have Iowa Senator Ashley Hinson, a Republican, challenging Democrat Abby Finkenauer. As a journalist, I've seen quite a bit of conversation about this already, some mudslinging going on, that kind of thing. James, Todd, what are you guys seeing in your just review of this race? What do you think it's going to be like? What's that matchup going to look like?
I expect it to be pretty competitive. I mean, obviously, anytime an incumbent is on the ballot, they have an advantage. Ashley Hinson has been successful in her House runs, Iowa House runs, and won a district that the governor didn't win in the last race. So Republicans are feeling pretty good about her. She's going to be a strong campaigner. Abby Finkenauer's, kind of running. I would say she's doing the right things to get reelected. There's going to be a couple of big tests. One is her vote on impeachment, articles of impeachment. Two will be the USMCA. And as far as I can tell, she hasn't really told us what she's going to do on either one, and that's a smart move by an incumbent. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. But I expect it to be a competitive race.
Well, I think Finkenauer's stance on USMCA is that her one concern is that it would, the bill as it is, would increase drug price for a drug called, I believe it's called Biologic. That's her concern, and so she's totally for passing it. It's just that needs to be solved, and I think that's something a lot of people have been talking about, including Chuck Grassley. So, and she's come out saying she would vote for impeachment. So, but it will be a really competitive race. People love Ashley Hinson, and in her time as a rep, she's tried to do some bipartisan things that have been very interesting, like her bill about health insurance and birth control. And so I think that she is an interesting and formidable character for sure. So.
Well, and I think it's going to be a really, really expensive race. You're going to see a lot of money coming in from outside groups. I wrote about a super PAC based in my part of town in Marion that has already is running radio ads not only in Finkenauer's district, but also Cindy Axtey's district, the 3rd district. I think that's just the beginning of a lot of independent expenditures where a lot of rich folks on both sides of the spectrum, a lot of big donors on the Republican side are going to be weighing in on this, because this is going to be one of the list of key races that those donors believe will be the key to whoever is going to control the House of Representatives going forward. So get ready to have your TV channels and radio stations, and I would just recommend go to Netflix as soon as possible and just skip the whole thing.
Before the break, let's pivot over to the one Senate race. Joni Ernst is facing her first re-election bid here. We have a question from our audience that is more or less asking if there is a competitive Democratic candidate in the running now that you see as being competitive facing Joni Ernst.
I bet, I know of 2 Democrats running for the nomination. I bet they would both tell you they're competitive.
But why are they, Adam? That's why you're here.
Because they don't like Joni Ernst, and they're banking on other people not liking Joni Ernst as well.
I mean, look.
We have Teresa Greenfield,
Yeah.
Eddie Morrow, and Kimberly Graham.
Sorry,
right?
I forgot about Eddie Morrow.
Rankin.
They're all great people, but none of them have the name recognition. Some of them are kind of boring. I mean, I want to see Joni Ernst defeated as much as, well, maybe some people here, as much as I want to see her defeated. But I think it would be great, but I just have a hard time seeing a candidate who has the recognition, who has the backing, who's a lot of them are great people, but you're kind of boring personalities. Somebody needs to put some bread bags on their feet and get on out there and be interesting. Come on.
I mean, Joni Ernst came out of nowhere to beat Bruce Braley.
I was going to say, it is
she had
December.
But she had some help. I mean, she had some pretty strategic, outside, Republican help, helping her with some of those ads, helping
Chuck
her with...
Schumer is on Teresa Greenfield's side. That's
Senator
some people
Ernst,
would call that strategic.
Yeah,
Senator
but I mean,
Ernst came out of a very competitive primary too, right? And certainly the Democratic candidate for U.S. Senate is going to have a lot of outside help next year.
Yeah, that goes without saying.
Well, let's hope so. But people love her in this state, and they do. I mean, y'all don't. Look, I want her gone, but you have to be realistic. People do like her, and good, then vote.
All right, well, we're going to go ahead and leave that here and have a brief 10-minute intermission. So go ahead and write us some more questions for state and local, which we'll come back for, and we'll have a great conversation.
We'll be back in just a moment. It's a special edition of River to River on Iowa Public Radio, Pints and Politics from Cedar Rapids. Back in just a moment. We want to pivot over to the legislature. About a month from now, is it, that we are back into the 2020 legislative session? Let me throw it out to the panel. What do you see as, and we have a trifecta here in our state and have for a couple of years. The Republicans are in control of both houses as well as the governorship. What do you see as far as priorities by the controlling party here?
I think this is the year that they'll fund education to so much that teachers won't know how to spend money. They're going to fill that I will fund, and we'll have trails and clean water
And free marijuana.
and free marijuana. Yeah.
And they're going
From your lips to Reynolds' ears, James.
to raise our taxes to pay for it. It's going to be.
Oh no! It's an election year. They'll cut taxes.
Well, yeah, they'll cut taxes for some and raise taxes for others, maybe.
Yeah. Well, some people should pay more.
Well,
Everyone but me.
So lest anyone think you're serious, now it's time to tell us what we're really going to see.
Well, it's always hard to tell what will really happen when they make sausage. You know, you start with a recipe, but what you end up with might be something else entirely. One of the things I've heard more than once is that Republicans, who are in control of the legislature, don't want to mess around with a lot of little stuff. They're going to do big things this year. And it's like, well, I'm not sure what's left. They've done a number of big things. And while I'm all for the legislature doing big things, I'm a little bit scared by that sort of a talk that they're going to do big things based on their track record. Yeah, I don't know. There's talk that they're going to do something about I will. What they'll do, again, we won't know until the last day of the session, the last hour of the session, probably. I think there probably will be some sort of a tax cut during the session because it is an election year. I hear people, including Republicans, talking about they want to do something about mental health and child care. Not sure what form that will take, but I'm willing to watch it roll out.
How are they going to fund those things?
Cut taxes, because that, you get more revenue when you cut taxes.
Oh, yeah. Explain it to me more.
If they're going to do big things, they'll probably do it late in the night when James and our colleague Rod Boschart are ready to go home.
Well, yeah.
Question from our...
Go ahead.
Go ahead, James.
No.
Okay. Question from our audience here pertaining to our state politics. And we were all saddened, surprised that our Chief Justice of the Iowa Supreme Court died suddenly. The author of the 2009 same-sex marriage decision died last month. This questioner asks, after the legislature changing the process of selecting judges for the Iowa Supreme Court, is the redistricting model in jeopardy? What has changed here in terms of what the legislature did to this process of filling vacancies in the Iowa Supreme Court?
Well, they gave the governor an additional pick on the State Judicial Nominating Commission, which picks Supreme Court justices. And instead of having the most senior justice, who is not the Chief Justice, be the chair of that commission, they changed it to, what was it? What was the...
I'm not sure how they...
I think that the commission picks its own chair,
I think so.
something along those lines. So they didn't radically change it. There was a far more radical plan proposed that would have changed the way those judicial nominating commissions were selected up and down the board from the district court level all the way up to the Supreme Court. I think it's no secret that the three justices that were appointed after the three justices were removed in 2010 are more conservative than the justices that they removed. I think probably it's conventional wisdom, at least, that the justices that Kim Reynolds has picked are probably more conservative than the ones they replaced. So the feeling is that the court leans further right than it did previously. How that affects the redistricting, I mean, I suppose if maps are rejected, you get to a point where the Supreme Court draws the districts, but you also, before that, get to a point where the legislature can draw districts, which
Right.
would probably be the step that would be more problematic than the court getting involved.
Yeah, and Republican leaders have said they don't see any reason to change the redistricting process, but the current process allows them to draw the boundaries. Where the court may come into play is when the legislature draws the boundaries and the party out of power, in this case the Democrats, then file suit to ask the court to throw those boundaries out. So it could have some impact. I've never heard much sentiment for changing the redistricting process. I think lawmakers like it. Maybe the political consultants, the people who run the campaigns, don't necessarily like it because they see the advantage of drawing their own lines. But for lawmakers, one of the things they like is that they don't have to do it, and so they can't be blamed for those districts. They might not like the results. Their district might change, and they might not like that. But the fact that they can't be blamed for those district lines appeals to quite a few members of the legislature.
Well, and the district maps in the past, and I mean, district maps have been rejected
Yes.
and redrawn by the Nonpartisan Legislative Services Agency, and then they vote and approve the second map. Those maps have in the past created fairly good competitive legislative districts. So legislators that are in power because of districts drawn before by that commission are loath to sort of throw that out and because they've benefited from the system. So I think the nonpartisan process has held pretty well. Now, of course, we've got a legislature that has looked at a lot of institutions that have worked pretty well and have decided to sort of run a bulldozer over them. So that's part of the worry that people have when they talk about the redistricting process and whether the Republicans will do something. But I mean, James is right. There isn't a lot of evidence that shows that they're interested in that at this point. And so I think the maps in 2021 will probably be drawn under our current process.
And if you look at the blowback in states, North Carolina comes to mind, for example. I mean, it's going to be incredibly expensive to fight those sorts of court battles, and I'm not sure that there's the appetite to go down that road. Again, the political consultants, the people who run campaigns may feel differently, and if they can influence legislators, maybe that will change. But right now, I don't see that as being the major issue of this session.
So James mentioned IWIL, that's Iowa's Water and Land Legacy, and so lawmakers and the governor are talking about filling that kind of trust fund, that outdoor trust fund that would pay for trails and land acquisition and water quality efforts. But lawmakers have also said, Republicans have said they want to change the formula of funding that was set out after that referendum. Todd, what type of legislation do you think we will see emerge there?
Well, we're maybe going to celebrate the 10th anniversary of voting for that by actually putting money in the fund. It's, you need a sales tax to fill it. You need at least, and if you raise the sales tax, say a penny, 3/8 of that cent goes into the trust fund. That's about $170 million, which, we've got multi-billion-dollar water quality issues, but that's a good start. It's, real money, a lot more than we're spending now, at least in the state budget. So, but there is sentiment out there, the Farm Bureau, other agriculture groups, they don't like that formula because the formula gives some money from the IWIL fund to trails and parks and other recreational activities. It's the Natural Resources and Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund. They don't like that last half. So, there's going to be an effort if there's so many hurdles that you have to pass. I mean, at first you have to decide whether you're going to raise the tax. And if Republicans decide that they're going to raise the tax, then what do they do with the rest of the penny? Do they use that to bankroll another tax cut? Do they look at mental health, children's mental health? What do they do with that money? And then you get to the discussion about the formula. And do you listen to those agriculture groups, or do you listen to a broader spectrum of groups like the broader spectrum of groups that was put together in the beginning to create the fund formula we have now. So it's, for environmental groups, it's sort of a careful what you wish for thing. They've wanted this fund to be filled, but they don't want the formula changed, but they may get a changed formula and a filled fund. So more water quality dollars, but administered by the Iowa Department of Agriculture, run by a former Monsanto lobbyist who has the backing of who was elected with the backing of a lot of large agriculture groups, agribusinesses. And I mean, we have a lot of, as I wrote today, we have a lot of the mechanisms that we depend on, the Environmental Protection Commission, the Department of Agriculture, the legislature. I mean, the agricultural influence over them is large. So, I mean, I think I'd be a little bit surprised if they raise taxes in an election year to do this, but I would not be surprised if they make that decision that this formula gets changed to put a lot more money into agriculture and a lot less money into trails and parks and the things that I think voters wanted when they approved this in 2010.
So just a brief follow-up. So Adam, I saw you applauding off to the side when we mentioned tax cut. Do you think it makes sense to round out the penny and then use that money to offer tax breaks?
For property tax relief? I mean, you couldn't propose a tax cut that I would say no to. So yeah.
Yeah, if you put it toward mental health, and then you roll back the county share of mental health, that would be one way to maybe increase mental health funding and also cut property taxes. That's being talked about. So
Well, we have all these things we need to fund,
yeah.
and it's not going to go to all of them, but we're going to talk about it, and we're going to be hopeful. And at what point do we stop giving them the benefit of the doubt? Like, taxes are probably going to be cut because it's politically expedient. Nothing is going to get funded. Our water quality is going to continue to be bad. The governor's going to continue to be like, children's mental health, but never put any money behind it because, again, it's not politically expedient. So, and then she's going to need to hold on to that reserve of surplus for the more tax cuts. So at what point are we just like robbing the citizens of this state to, be politically expedient and like, look, we saved you money on your taxes, but good luck drinking the water.
Yeah. And that's
swimming.
Well, and that's part
Your kids are Spider-Man now.
Offense. That's part of the worry with environmental activists, environmental groups want the fund filled, but there's also this worry that if they fill the trust fund, do they then, are there then commensurate cuts in Department of Natural Resources programs that already are funded? So in the end, is the net zero? So that's what you're saying is correct, that there is this worry that there's going to be a lot of talk, there's going to be a lot of lip service paid to water quality, as there always is at the State House, and in the end, the balance sheet's going to look a lot like it is now, even if they fill the funds. So that's the danger.
Revenue neutral is very popular at the Capitol. Revenue neutral.
About as popular as doing nothing. They run neck and neck.
Yeah.
Which doing nothing is also revenue neutral.
Right. Because then you can just hope they'll do something again later, maybe.
Well, then you leave
Maybe
stuff
next
to
year.
promise. Well, you leave stuff to promise. You don't want to do everything at once, because then what are your hollow promises then?
For the sake of our Iowa Public Radio listeners who may have just joined us, I want to remind you you're listening to a special edition of River to River, Iowa Public Radio teaming up with the Gazette on this Thursday evening in Cedar Rapids at CSPS with our panelists Todd Dorman, Adam Sullivan, Liz Lenz, and James Lynch, Ben Kiefer with my co-host Aaron Jordan of the Gazette. Let's go to this question. Since you're talking about the environment, this questioner wants to know, will the Lynn County Board of Supervisors climate change emergency declaration make a difference? And this taps into more than just Lynn County. There are, across the nation and in other parts of Iowa, local municipalities acting to counter or stave off the worst of climate change because our federal government is not. So what are your thoughts on that?
I haven't read the Lynn County, what they passed yet. I will, so I live in Iowa City. I'll speak for Iowa City. They passed a climate change resolution that I thought was very actually effective. It's not just a resolution saying, hey, some other higher form of government needs to get on this, or that we think climate change is real. They have a real plan, one, to reduce carbon emissions, and two, to adapt to climate changes, right? To be flood resilient, to be heat resilient, things like that. So I won't speak on the Lynn County. I appreciate what they're doing. I'm for it. But I would also encourage folks to look at what Iowa City's done, and I think that ought to be a model for other cities as well. And I believe in climate change, even though I'm a Republican.
I think it's always a good thing, for city leaders and municipal leaders in any capacity to say, this is a problem and we need to change it. And so I applaud that. And I think the Iowa City model is a great model, and it's something that we need to be doing. That said, however, our city and our supervisors are having some real problems right now. And we can't even agree on basic things like flood control. And so it's really interesting to me that this is happening right now with the March on City Hall. And I just wonder how effective is it going to be when we really need some unity? And when we were talking to city council members for our editorial board endorsement process, everybody there was okay, yeah, we need to be doing something. So it seems like there's this support, and yet it's a great move, and yet it also feels like another tool that's just going to be continuing to fuel this animosity that's really baffling in this city, that we have these adult elected leaders that just can't get together and do basic things like do some flood funding and just solve some problems and do your jobs. And so I really that's the kind, my hesitancy there is yeah, climate change, let's do something about it. Also, stop fighting, you grown-ups.
Well, a lot of these policies, and this really isn't a policy, that it's a resolution. It sets some goals, which all make sense and are laudable. The proof of the pudding, of course, is in the eating, and we'll see what they can do. It's ironic that the county is doing this at the same time that 600 megawatts of carbon dioxide-free electric energy is being shuttered out at Duane Arnold.
Yeah.
That's enough power to power up Lynn County, and so I don't know if that makes the goals harder to achieve.
Well, and the political expediency of it, like you say, does it have teeth? Is it just for show? We need actual change. We don't need people positioning themselves on something if it's not going to actually make a difference here. Our lives aren't something you should gamble with politically. Also, our supervisors are paid a lot of money to do their jobs, so just do them.
I would just say to add that different levels of government have different roles and responsibilities, different authorities. The county's argument would be that they've made pretty big investments in conservation, which I think is important, something county governments are well equipped to do, something city governments are not necessarily well equipped to do.
I wanted to shift gears briefly here. So Governor Reynolds last month said the state will appeal to the Iowa Supreme Court a jury's $1.5 million verdict against the former, in favor of the former Workers' Compensation Commissioner Chris Godfrey, who was, who was gay and basically faced kind of some pressure to leave his office. For the state, Todd, I don't know if you could express what are the pros and cons of this sort of appeal?
Well,
start with the pros.
Yeah, I guess the pro is that they avoid a $1.5 million jury verdict, although they've spent, according to the AP tally, they've spent $2.4 million defending the governor and his legal counsel and staff. The pro is that maybe you win a
Just say it. It's garbage.
Well, Kim Reynolds mentioned this 182-page brief that the former governor's legal defense funded, and this is their argument. And they do make legal arguments, although they also, in this brief, talk about how what this really about is Roxanne Conlon's political vendetta against Terry Branstad, because she lost the governorship 30 7 years ago. They talk about how really the governor is pretty much the victim. He came out of the private sector to save Iowa from the economic abyss. They make all sorts of, they talk about they question the jury, the potential jury pool about their views on LGBTQ rights, which because of a discrimination case, she probably would. But they called this a religious test that massacred freedom of religion. So, I mean, while they're accusing, Chris Godfrey and his team of playing politics, the Branstad folks are playing politics right along with them, even more so. And the bottom line is we're continuing to pay for what basically was a mistake that Governor Branstad made. We have a workers' compensation commissioner that has a term that overlaps a governor's term because that's an office that's supposed to be insulated from political influence because they decide workers' compensation cases. The governor didn't like the job that he did because his business friends wanted someone that was going to be more pro-employer. So he tries to hound him out of office. He slashes his salary. And now they put this before a jury that listened to days of testimony and concluded, yeah, he discriminated against Chris Godfrey.
But isn't that what the governor's office said? Yes, I pushed him because I didn't like his ideology, or not that it wasn't because he was gay. Wasn't that the governor's argument?
Well, that was the governor's argument, and they said that the governor had hired gay staff, and so that meant that he wouldn't discriminate, although the governor's record on civil rights is not exactly stellar. It's actually more basically silence while these issues were being litigated and worked out in the legislature. The governor tried to stay out of it, but was very happy to gain political advantage by angry Republican voters going to the polls in 2010 when he got reelected, reelected second time around. So I understand where his legal team is coming from, but I don't think you can be convinced that the governor somehow is a victim in this whole scenario.
As we continue to kind of cast out and preview the 2020 Iowa legislative session, there are so many possible issues we could talk about. We only have a few minutes left. Let me just sort of throw out into the air figuratively some of the issues that seem to be out there, and you pick one out of the air and do a quick hit on it, your thoughts on it: felon voting, welfare reform, criminal justice reform, abortion, childcare, medical marijuana, vaping, mental health funding. There are a whole bunch I just threw into the air. Take a chance to pick out one you want to comment on with an observation.
I think they'll all be there. They'll all be there.
All of
They'll
those.
talk about all of those things.
And we'll do nothing on any of them.
Yeah, I think, to me, one of the most interesting issues to watch is the felon voting, because the governor has really made clear what she wants. And I'm not sure, I am sure that the Republican majority isn't necessarily on the same wavelength as the governor. There are a number of people who have significant roles in this debate who think that you should have to make all your restitution, pay all your fines, do all these things before you get your felon voting rights back. And if you're serious about restoring felon voting rights, that's not going to work.
And just to keep everybody up to speed, and felon voting rights, Iowa's in a minority of states that doesn't
It's
automatically.
like the only state now.
The only state.
I think, or one of two.
Kentucky's in the process.
Yeah,
Okay.
one of two.
Just to remind us, so if you are a felon, you've served your time, you're out. So the question is, right now, under the current process, you have to apply to have
Right.
those voting rights reinstated, right?
Right.
Okay, and that puts Iowa in a distinct minority in the country.
Yeah. There's one other state, Kentucky, that has basically the same process, but
And they just elected a Democratic governor.
Yeah, and they're sort of in the process of changing that. So Iowa could be the 50th, the lone one state, that has this position, and there's going to be pressure on the governor to take action on her own, executive action, if the legislature doesn't act. And I don't know if she said she doesn't want to do that. She thinks this should be a legislative decision, a decision of the people. The process, what the legislature has laid out now, would be a constitutional amendment that voters would have to approve. And it seems like voter sentiment probably, is in favor of restoring felon voting rights. But I'm not sure that the legislature will let it go that far.
This passed the House overwhelmingly last year.
Yeah.
It got caught up in the Senate. I think that most, even Republican lawmakers would say they need to do something, whether that's full restitution or right after you get out of prison is up in the air. I would like to see, and I like the governor a lot more than some of my colleagues do, as you all know. But I would like to see her take some leadership on this, right? She has some bargaining chips. She has some things where she can say, hey, if you don't play my game, I'm not going to play your game. I'm not going to sign this bill or the other. So if this is really something she's serious about, then I'd like to see her take action on it. On criminal justice reform, medical marijuana, like you mentioned, I'd like to see her stake out how far is she willing to go, because that was the big problem in medical marijuana last year. They passed a really good bill, and then the governor took her time and said, oh, I'm not going to sign this. So come out right now and say, what will you sign, and what can come to your desk, and we can make law and help people in Iowa that need help.
All right. And just to make sure people are aware, we're not talking about a small number. We're talking about tens of thousands of Iowans who were convicted of felonies.
And I believe that the governor's office, at least a few months ago when I checked, she had approved every request that had come to her. The problem is people don't know about that process. Maybe they're low literacy, maybe they're English language learners. They don't even know how to begin to send an application to the governor. So it needs to be automatic. And then you're also seeing that people who think they're able to vote think they are able to vote, but who aren't, are going to vote. And then the state's list of felons who can't vote isn't even correct. So some people's ballots have been thrown out because the state says they're a felon and they're not.
Yeah. You know, we live in a very politically divisive time. That is not a new thing that you've heard before. But I think there's so many issues that Iowa could really make progress on, like medical marijuana, like statute of limitations on childhood sexual assault cases, which is something that has come up again and again and has been shot down because the person who keeps sponsoring those bills is also somebody who's like very pro abortion rights. So you can see but like there is just some real low-hanging fruit that we as a state could really make some progress on that I think have bipartisan support, but we don't seem to have the leadership that will take control and will actually have some courage and do something. And so, like, prove me wrong, please, like, fix the if it's all about just making Liz shut up, then that's why Jesus put me here on this earth. But I think we talk about the issues that are so divisive, but there are some things that I think people in this state really want to see some progress made on. We want clean water. We want medical marijuana. We want people to be able to vote. Like, there's three things. Go for it,
Todd, what would you add?
What would I add
Well,
to
just of all the issues Ben mentioned, are there any other ones that you would like to see come up?
Oh, I'd like to see a tax cut for columnists and maybe
No,
well,
I
there's a
wanna pay
precious
taxes.
few, so that wouldn't take.
I know it'd be revenue neutral, I think, because
Definitely.
who knows how many of us will be working? I don't know, but no, we've got a very long list already. Beyond just doing. I mean, there was a push last year, and I think there'll be a push again, and I hope it's resisted, to sort of try to make it more difficult to donate land for public use. I mean, the Farm Bureau came in with a bill that tried to sort of make that exceedingly difficult. They got a huge pushback. Lawmakers got scared, luckily, and rejected that. But you have to watch to make sure that things like that don't come as amendments to non-controversial bills and things like that. So, but an election year, I would expect the legislature is, as James said, is going to try to limit their agenda a little bit and get out on the campaign trail, which is what they generally try to do in an even-numbered year. Right after they pass politically motivated stuff and force people to have bad gotcha votes that they can put in TV ads.
What about something that the science is definitely behind, which it seems lawmaking is not necessarily behind?
Climate change.
We talked about that. I wanted to raise another one that we haven't raised yet this evening. Laws that restrict, that help the problem of distracted driving. Now, if I would ask our audience, let's see how much candor there is in our audience about how many of you let's just take this last week, use your cell phone in some capacity while you're behind the wheel of a car. Clap.
It's an honest audience.
We know from science this makes you possibly as dangerous as a drunk driver. The science is there to prove it.
Is that a choice? Cell
What a
phone or
choice.
drunk?
No, I didn't put that up there. I don't know. I'm throwing that out there as an area where it's a new development. We all have these cell phones. We all think they're very important. Many of us think that can't wait until we get parked and use the cell phone. Will there be any action in the legislature?
I have not heard that talked about. There's no doubt what you're saying is true, that it's a very stupid thing to use your cell phone when you're driving. How are you going to, thank you. How are you going to enforce that? So traffic stops are really dangerous. They're dangerous for other motorists on the road. They're dangerous for drivers. They're dangerous for police officers. Surveillance, apparently there's new technology they're coming out with that can detect if you're using your phone when you're driving. Who knows what else they can detect while you're doing that? And so I'm with you in spirit, but we can't pass.
Considering people are dying, I'm glad you're with me in spirit.
But I don't want to pass a bunch of new laws where we don't have an enforcement mechanism or where the enforcement actually makes driving more dangerous.
Well, and the number one reason why they won't pass limiting cell phone use in cars is because legislators use cell phones in cars. I mean, they drive all over the state. I mean, that's whatever affects them is going to be the last thing that gets banned. I mean, that's just the way it is.
Wasn't that also a factor in the traffic camera legislation?
Yeah, well, that's why. Yeah, legislators and their family members getting tickets was how they discovered the traffic camera issue. So
but we didn't ban them still. I mean, that's what that gentleman wanted, and we didn't.
And it may have been why we didn't lower our blood alcohol from 0.10 to 0.08 right away.
They did it for the boats, though, some years ago.
So, James, you reported last week about Iowa receiving requests from about 150 remote caucus sites. How will the Iowa Democratic Party decide which of those to approve? And is there anything these sites are going to have to do to kind of ensure that those preferences are made known properly?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the criteria is for approving those. I kind of doubt all 150 will be approved, but they'll probably look at things like, okay, how many people are actually going to attend that caucus in the Bahamas? I volunteer to cover it, but as long as I can take my family. So they'll look at things like that. Some of these, number of people who will actually participate, and there'll have to be some way of actually, okay, is there somebody who will chair that precinct caucus, do those sorts of things, and there has to be some sort of maintaining the integrity of the caucus, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is so that's going to be a factor for them. I think it's going to be interesting because quite frankly, I think it's a bigger challenge than if they had the virtual caucuses where people called in or logged in on their computer, because these satellite caucuses, they really haven't, you're basically taking somebody's word that they're having a caucus and that 145 people are there and they all voted for, whichever candidate that I want. But they're supposed to announce that middle of this month.
Okay, we've come almost to the end of our time. I have one more question for our panel before we adjourn and talk amongst ourselves and go out into the evening. Of course, making predictions is a big part of the political chatter and punditry. We are nearing the end of 2019. I want to ask our panelists in closing, what current predictions do you believe will be proven wildly off the mark by the time we end next year, 2020? A year from now. Does anybody want to leap into that? And
I'll go first.
Okay, James.
Anything I said tonight. Because I've been looking at my cell phone and drinking.
I'll go next.
Adam?
Anything James said tonight.
Liz?
Oh gosh, like a prediction that they took all the funny lines, so I'll be serious for you, Ben. I don't think Buttigieg is a viable candidate. I think we're gonna see in the next couple months. I think we're gonna see him fall precipitously for some reason. So sorry, I still love you, and you're still invited to my birthday party. So
I'm not even invited to your birthday
you're
party.
definitely not invited to my birthday party.
Todd Dorman, you bring up the end here.
Oh, jeez. I don't believe the predictions that next year will be the last presidential election. I think we're going to have more after that.
He thinks our democracy will continue.
I think it'll survive at least another 5 years.
With that hopeful note that democracy will continue, I guess it's a good place to end our political discussion. Aaron Jordan and our panelists. Thanks to everyone.
Thank you. Just as you're packing up here, I wanted to again thank CSPS for hosting us tonight and remind you that the next Pints in Politics is January 16th. You can get your pre-purchase passes tonight yet for $30. Thanks a lot.
Tune in tomorrow, Iowa Public Radio, River to River over the noon hour, and that will be put online that you can listen to online or download as a podcast at iowapublicradio.org. Thanks.